guys, it's Mrs. Behrens with your reading lesson for today. We will be learning about primary sources. You will need your reader's notebook and a pencil, and here are our learning targets. I can read a variety of resources to help me better understand the experiences of others. I can ask respectful questions about experiences different from my own. And I can identify the difference between a primary source and a secondary source. Let's get started. Now first, what is a primary source? A primary source is an original. It is a first-hand account of an event or experience. Examples of primary sources would be somebody's diary, a painting, a photograph of an event, an autobiography, the story that somebody writes about their own life, a speech, a poem, an interview, a video of something happening. These are all first-hand accounts of events or experiences. Secondary sources, on the other hand, are not first-hand accounts. They are sources created later by somebody else. Secondary sources oftentimes explain or describe events or periods of history. Examples of secondary sources would be textbooks, encyclopedias, or a biography that is written by somebody else. Today we are going to have the chance to take a look at some primary sources and see how we can better understand the information. As we go through some of the primary sources to evaluate them and ask questions, we want to make sure that we're asking questions in a respectful way. Many primary sources come from people's personal experiences. So in order to be respectful of that, we have on the screen an anchor chart that you guys have seen before. It gives some ideas of respectful ways to phrase these questions or noticings. For example, "That's different from my experience. Can you tell me more about that? I wonder what it was like to, that is interesting to me, or I would like to learn more about." Be sure to avoid using terms like weird or wrong, as it can be disrespectful to somebody's experience. Now, before we move forward, these primary sources that we have the chance to take a peek at come from the boarding schools that many Native Americans or American Indians were sent to encourage assimilation, to try to rid them of their Native American traditions and culture and assimilate them into what was viewed as American society. These sources are primary sources because they are first-hand accounts of what really happened. As we page through these sources, make note of what you notice and of the questions that you have. This photograph is a primary source. It says 2 Shoshone and 3 Arapaho students as they arrived at Carlisle in 1897. Carlisle Indian School class of 1897. It even has all the names of the individuals listed below. A group of 18 Pueblo girls at Carlisle Indian School. Learning finger songs at Carlisle Indian School, the children's primary class. Before we look at the last few, ask yourself now, what is different in looking at a primary source versus a secondary source? Does it make you feel anything different or think anything different than if you were, for example, reading a different article about the same topic? Math lesson, 2nd grade class in 1901. Making tinware in the tin shop, 1901. These are examples of photographs that serve as primary sources. And lastly, we have a piece of writing that is also a primary source. This piece of writing is titled Losing Ourselves, the Boarding School Experience. And the reason this is a primary source is because it is a first-hand account. Now, after looking at these primary sources, let's quickly talk about the important questions that we need to ask ourselves anytime we're viewing a source, whether it's primary or secondary. First and foremost, we want to ask ourselves, what kind of a source is it? Is it writing? Is it a picture, a piece of art, a letter, a poem, a speech? And ask ourselves, is it primary or is it secondary? Next, we look at authorship. Who authored the source? Who wrote it? Who painted it? Who spoke the speech? And what do I know about that person that might affect whether it is reliable or not? Historical context. When and where did the source come from? What was going on in that place, in the world, at that time, that might change the author's message, or might change how I would look at that source and take that information? The audience. Who was that source originally created for? Was it a speech written for a public? Was it a lesson created for a class? Was it a photo taken for a magazine? And how might the intended audience change whether the source is reliable or not? The purpose of the source. Why did the author create it in the first place? Was it to persuade you? Was it to inform somebody of something? Was it simply to entertain people or for enjoyment? How about point of view? What was the author's point of view as they were writing or creating the source? What other beliefs might the author have that could impact the source that they created? Significance. Why does it matter? Why is it significant? Why is one photograph more well known or more important than another? What about limitations? Yes, sources give us information. It's also important to wonder, what is it not telling me? Is there something this source is leaving out on purpose? What other voices might have a different point of view? Wait a second, but why? Why does it matter whether a source is primary or secondary? Why do we ask ourselves these questions? There are many reasons. Here are 3 big ones. It helps us better understand the information that sources give us. It helps us determine how reliable a source is. And it changes how we use those sources to inform our own writing. Now it is your job to practice determining whether a source is primary or secondary, and asking some of those important questions that help us really understand the information we're getting. In Schoology, you have an assignment attached. View the sources that you are provided and complete the attached table that will guide you through some of those important questions.